a storm, a god, a flood that drowns the world. Everyone knows this story. Noah's Ark rising above the chaos. The animals, 2 by 2. Salvation floating on endless waters. But here's what they never told anyone. This exact same story echoes across the globe. From ancient Mesopotamia to the mountains of Tibet. From Aboriginal Dreamtime to Aztec prophecies. Civilizations separated by thousands of miles and millennia. All remembering the same catastrophic flood. They never met. Never traded stories around campfires. Never shared their sacred texts. Yet somehow, they all knew. What if this wasn't a myth, but a memory? What if every culture on Earth carries the genetic echo of something that actually happened? And what if it was meant to warn us? To understand this genetic echo, one must first understand the story itself, the myth that refuses to die. But what makes this story truly disturbing isn't just that it exists, it's how precisely it repeats. It has been whispered in Sunday school, carved into temple walls, chanted around dying fires. The story that refuses to die. It begins with divine rage gods, or God looking down at humanity's corruption, their patience finally shattered. The heavens crack open. Waters pour forth, not just rain, but the very foundations of the earth breaking apart. Oceans rise from their beds. Rivers abandon their banks. The sky becomes an enemy. But always, always, there is the chosen one. The righteous man who receives the warning, who builds the vessel, sometimes an ark, sometimes a raft, sometimes a simple box sealed with pitch and prayer. He gathers his family, the animals, the seeds of tomorrow. While the wicked laugh and feast, he prepares for the unthinkable. Then comes the water, total, merciless, absolute. Mountains disappear beneath the surface. Cities vanish like they never existed. The screams of the drowning become whispers, then silence. For 40 days and nights, or a year and a day, or until the god's anger finally cools the world, becomes an ocean without shores. But this is a story of hope, not horror. The waters recede. The vessel finds land, a mountain peak, a sacred hill, solid ground that remembers what it means to hold life. The chosen one sends out birds to find dry earth. He offers sacrifices to appease the divine. The rainbow appears as a covenant, a promise that this will never happen again. And from that vessel emerges the future. New humanity, new animals, new plants, the world reborn, washed clean, given another chance. This story lives in human bones. People feel its weight, even if they've never set foot in a church or temple. It's sacred not just because it's old, but because it carries the weight of ultimate endings and impossible new beginnings. But here's where understanding cracks open like the ancient sky. It's not one story, it's many, and they all sound the same. Not just similar, identical, as if they're all remembering the same event. The Babylonians called him Utnapishtim. The Hindus knew him as Manu. Greeks whispered of Deucalion. The Ojibwe spoke of Nanabozho. Each culture, each civilization, each people who never crossed paths with the other soul, carrying this identical memory forward through millennia. And when scientists finally decoded the oldest tablets, they discovered something that shouldn't be possible. The scope of this mystery demands investigation. Step into the impossible puzzle. Imagine a world where the internet doesn't exist, where continents are separated by months of treacherous travel, where entire civilizations rise and fall without ever knowing others exist. Now imagine them all telling the exact same story. In ancient Sumer, 4,000 years before Christ, clay tablets spoke of Utnapishtim. The gods decreed humanity's destruction through flood. Ea, the water god, whispered warnings to the wall of Utnapishtim's reed house. Build a boat. 7 days and 7 nights the waters will rage. Utnapishtim sealed his vessel with bitumen, loaded it with his family and all living creatures. When the flood came, even the gods wept at what they had unleashed. Turn across millennia to ancient Greece. Deucalion received Zeus's warning through dreams and omens. The bronze race has become corrupt, violent, beyond redemption. For 9 days and 9 nights, Zeus floods the earth. Only Deucalion's wooden chest survives, coming to rest on Mount Parnassus. From the stones they throw behind them, new humanity springs forth. In the sacred texts of India, witness Manu, the first man, saving a small fish that grows into Matsya, Vishnu's avatar. A flood will destroy all life, Matsya warns. Build a boat. When the cosmic deluge arrives, Matsya pulls Manu's vessel through the endless waters with a rope made from the serpent king Vasuki. 7 sages join him, the seeds of the future world. Across the ocean, in lands the others never dreamed existed, the Maya speak of multiple destructions by flood. In their Popol Vuh, the gods grow disgusted with wooden humans who cannot praise them properly. They send torrents from the sky and floods from below. Only a few survive to become the monkeys in the trees living, reminders of failed creation. The Norse whisper of Bergelmir, the frost giant who survives Ymir's flood of blood in a makeshift vessel. Australian Aboriginal peoples tell of Tidalik, the giant frog who drinks all the world's water, then releases it in a catastrophic flood that reshapes the land. In North America, the Ojibwe remember Nanabozo warning the animals of the coming waters, saving them on his great raft. Each story carries the same DNA: divine warning, chosen survivor, impossible vessel, total destruction, miraculous salvation, new world emerging from the depths. The pattern is so precise it feels intentional. The divine messenger who breaks the cosmic silence, the righteous few who listen when others scoff. The frantic building, gathering, preparing for unthinkable catastrophe. The waters that don't just flood, they unmake reality itself. And always, always, the promise of renewal hidden in the devastation. The matrix becomes clear how these stories fit together, like puzzle pieces scattered across time and space. Sumerian tablets echo Aboriginal dreamtime. Hebrew scriptures harmonize with Hindu Puranas. Greek philosophy resonates with Maya prophecy. Norse sagas align with Native American oral traditions. None of these civilizations ever met. The Sumerians fell to dust before the Maya built their first pyramid. Australian Aboriginals developed their stories in isolation for tens of thousands of years. Yet somehow, impossibly, they all remember. The same warning, the same salvation, the same terror of water reclaiming the world. To explain this collective memory, one must travel back to when the memories were first made. 200 years ago, the world ended. Not in mythology, not in sacred texts, in actual, measurable, geological time. The ice sheets that have locked away Earth's water for millennia are collapsing. Scientists call it meltwater pulse 1 bar, catastrophic release of frozen oceans back into the sea. In mere decades, centuries at most, sea levels surge upward by meters. Coastlines that have been stable for thousands of years vanish overnight. Entire civilizations are swallowed by rising waters. Not slowly, like modern climate change, but with the brutal speed of geological violence. The vast plains where ancestors hunted mammoth and gathered shellfish disappear beneath waves that stretch to horizons that no longer exist. This isn't theoretical. It can be measured in ice cores, sediment layers, isotope signatures locked in ancient coral. The evidence screams from the Earth itself. Consider Doggerland, a landmass larger than Britain that once connected Europe to England. Rivers flowed through forests, where fishing boats now drift. Ancestors built settlements, raised families, developed cultures in this lost Atlantis of the North Sea. Then meltwater pulse 1b hit. Within generations, Doggerland became legend, then memory, then myth. But the trauma traveled. Follow the refugees as they flee inland, carrying nothing but what they could grab, and the stories burned into their minds. Children who played in Doggerland's forests now tell their grandchildren about the time the sea swallowed the world. Those grandchildren, who never saw the lost land, pass down tales of impossible waters and divine wrath. Turn attention to Southeast Asia, where Sunderland once stretched between modern Thailand and Australia, continental shelf exposed during the Ice Age, supporting complex societies. When the ice melted, this vast landscape vanished beneath the waves. But the people didn't vanish. They scattered across islands and continents, carrying their flood stories like genetic code. In Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and America, similar scenes unfold. As waters rise, populations migrate in waves across what remains of the crossing. They carry their survival stories into the Americas, where these memories evolve into the flood myths of hundreds of Native American tribes. The pattern becomes unavoidable. Every major flood myth maps onto a region where post-glacial flooding actually occurred. The stories aren't random, they're geographical, they're historical. They're the traumatic memories of real people who watched their entire worlds disappear beneath rising seas. But here the mystery deepens beyond comfort. These pulse events happened at different times across different regions. Yet the stories share not just similar themes, but identical structures. The divine warning, the chosen survivor, the vessel that saves, the renewed world emerging from chaos. How do separate traumatic events, separated by centuries and continents, crystallize into the same narrative pattern? The evidence forces consideration of possibilities that challenge everything assumed about human memory and cultural transmission. Did the displaced peoples carry more than just survival knowledge? Did they somehow preserve not just the facts of catastrophic flooding, but a deeper paterna template for how civilizations process and survive existential trauma? Or does this recurring structure point to something even more unsettling? Multiple pulse events across thousands of years, each one carving the same scar into human consciousness, each one reinforcing the pattern until it becomes embedded in the species' collective memory. The evidence presents itself clearly: geological proof of catastrophic flooding, archaeological traces of displaced civilizations, and mythological stories that preserve both the trauma and the survival instructions. The science and the stories align with a precision that feels almost intentional. The flood myths aren't just stories, they're data. Compressed cultural information about how to recognize, survive, and recover from the kind of catastrophic sea level rise that has happened before and will happen again. Ancient ancestors didn't just survive the floods, they encoded the survival instructions for future generations. But how does one preserve knowledge across millennia, without writing, without technology, without any guarantee that civilization itself will survive? The answer lies in understanding myths not as fantasies, but as the world's oldest hard drives. Stand in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, deep in the Arctic permafrost. Steel and concrete protecting millions of seeds from catastrophe, a modern ark for preserving life's genetic blueprint. Around the world, similar vaults store human knowledge. DNA banks, digital archives, cultural repositories. Modern civilization encodes survival instructions for some unknown future crisis. Ancient ancestors had no steel vaults, no digital storage, no refrigeration units humming in mountain caverns. They had something more durable, stories that lodge in human memory and refuse to let go. Consider the Ark itself not as a boat, but as a symbol. Here lies the ultimate preservation protocol. 2 of every kind, male and female. The genetic minimum needed to restart a species. The biological mathematics of survival encoded in a narrative so compelling that it survives oral transmission across millennia. Ancient peoples weren't just telling stories, they were programming future generations with crisis management software. The chosen survivor isn't random. He's always the one who listens when others ignore warnings, who prepares when others feast, who builds when others mock. Here emerges the psychological profile of who survives catastrophes, not the strongest or most numerous, but the ones who take distant threats seriously. The paranoid, the prepared, the outliers who hear whispers in the wind. But there's deeper code hidden in these stories. The animals entering 2 by 2 aren't just passengers, they're genetic data being preserved. The olive branch returning to Noah's hand isn't just poetry, it's ecological reconnaissance, testing whether the environment can support life again. The Rainbow Covenant isn't just divine promise, it's atmospheric science, recognizing the relationship between weather patterns and survival. Every element serves double duty. Spiritual meaning for the masses, survival data for those who know how to read between the sacred lines. These stories function like time capsules, carrying practical knowledge wrapped in religious packaging. How to recognize approaching climate disasters. How to prepare for societal collapse. How to rebuild civilization from genetic and cultural minimum viable populations. The flood myth becomes a disaster preparedness manual, disguised as divine revelation. Modern science does this too. DNA sequences get encoded in digital storage, vast libraries compressed onto quantum drives, seed collections buried in Arctic ice. Humanity is doing exactly what ancient ancestors did, just with different technology. But their method might be more resilient than ours. Hard drives fail, concrete cracks, ice melts. Stories, however, replicate themselves in human minds across generations. They evolve, adapt, survive in ways our fragile modern archives never could. The flood myths may actually be compressed files containing survival protocols. The chosen ones weren't mythical figures, but real people who successfully decoded ancestral warnings about recurring catastrophic cycles. Ancient ancestors embedded the instructions for surviving the next great flood in the most indestructible storage medium they could find: human memory itself. But the stories preserved more than just survival protocols. They encoded the actual blueprints. The vessels described in flood myths defy every expectation of what a boat should be. Noah's Ark stretches 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, a massive rectangular box with no sail, no rudder, no means of propulsion. It's not designed to navigate. It's designed to survive. The Babylonian version, preserved on cuneiform tablets, describes something even stranger: a perfect cube, equal length, width, and height, the most mathematically stable shape possible. In 2014, Irving Finkel, a curator at the British Museum, decoded a 40-year-old Babylonian tablet that revolutionized understanding of these ancient vessels. The tablet doesn't describe a ship, it describes a massive circular coracle woven from rope and waterproofed with bitumen. Instructions so precise that modern engineers could follow them. Finkel and his team actually built one. It worked. But here's what makes the reconstruction unsettling. The vessel performs terribly as a boat. It spins uncontrollably. It can't be steered toward any destination. It does only one thing superbly: it floats, no matter what. Even in the most violent waters, even loaded far beyond any reasonable capacity, it stays afloat. Greek texts describe Deucalion's survival vessel as a simple wooden chest again, no mention of sails or steering mechanisms. Hindu scriptures detail Manu's boat as something pulled by a fish, entirely dependent on divine guidance rather than human navigation. The Maya describe vessels that float like gourds, round and ungovernable. The pattern emerges across every culture. These aren't ships. They're survival capsules. Modern naval architecture follows principles of hydrodynamics, speed, maneuverability. These ancient designs ignore all of that. They prioritize only one thing: keeping their contents alive when everything else drowns. They're the nautical equivalent of a bomb shelter built to endure catastrophe, not to travel gracefully through normal conditions. The shapes themselves encode survival wisdom. Cubes and spheres distribute stress evenly across all surfaces. Circular vessels have no weak corners where pressure can concentrate and crack the hull. Rectangular arcs maximize internal volume for cargo, while minimizing materials needed for construction. Every design choice prioritizes structural integrity over performance. Even more revealing, these vessels often can't return to shore under their own power. They're built for one-way trips into chaos, trusting that when the waters recede, they'll simply settle wherever the currents deposit them. They're not escape vehicles, they're time machines, designed to carry their precious cargo from one world into the next. The ancient engineers weren't building boats. They were building evolutionary lifeboats. Vessels that could protect the genetic and cultural information needed to restart civilization after the waters reclaimed everything else. The strangeness of their shapes becomes their genius. They prioritize survival over navigation, floating over steering, endurance over elegance. These weren't myths describing impossible vessels. They were technical manuals describing emergency survival technology. And every technical manual includes landing coordinates. The vessels don't drift aimlessly. They seek the high places, the mountains that remember what it means to touch the sky. Mount Ararat rises from the Turkish-Armenian border, its twin peaks piercing 17,000 feet into thin air. Here, according to Hebrew tradition, Noah's Ark found its rest. But Ararat isn't alone in claiming this honor. Islamic texts placed the landing on Mount Judi, 200 miles southeast. Hindu scriptures anchor Manu's vessel on Mount Meru, the cosmic axis of their world. Greek myths settle Deucalion's chest on Mount Parnassus. Across the ocean, Andean peoples speak of survival vessels reaching their sacred peaks, while Himalayan cultures preserve similar stories of high-altitude salvation. The pattern reveals itself. Flood survivors don't just seek dry land, they seek the highest possible ground. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. Mountains offer more than elevation, they provide what survival experts call tactical advantage. Clear sightlines to survey the transformed landscape below, fresh water from snow and springs, natural fortification against whatever threats emerge in the post-flood chaos, access to diverse ecological zones as one descends, alpine meadows for grazing, forested slopes for timber and game, river valleys for agriculture. But perhaps most importantly, mountains serve as beacons. Visible from vast distances, they guide other survivors to convergence points where civilization can restart. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, massive temple complex built on a mountaintop 600 years ago, just as the Ice Age ended and sea levels began their catastrophic rise. Enormous stone pillars arranged in circles, carved with symbols of animals and cosmic imagery, predating Stonehenge by 60 years. It required thousands of workers, sophisticated planning, advanced engineering, yet it was built by people we're told were simple hunter-gatherers, unless they weren't starting from scratch. Unless Göbekli Tepe represents a restart point, a place where flood survivors gathered to rebuild their shattered world, carrying forward the knowledge and techniques from whatever came before. Similar anomalies appear across the globe. Sophisticated megalithic structures, appearing suddenly in the archaeological record, always on high ground, always seeming too advanced for their supposed timeline. Sacsayhuaman in Peru, New Grange in Ireland, the Pyramid of Gunung Padang in Indonesia, each one positioned on elevated terrain, each one requiring organizational and technical capabilities that challenge conventional timelines of human development. The mountains become libraries, repositories, where survivors gathered to preserve and rebuild. The elevated positions weren't just about avoiding future floods. They were about creating visible monuments that would guide other survivors home across vast distances and deep time. These weren't endings. They were restart points. The flood myths don't conclude with destruction, they conclude with renewal. The vessel finds the mountain, the survivors emerge, the world begins again. But now it becomes clear this beginning might actually be a restoration, a return to building on high ground, where knowledge could be preserved and transmitted safely to future generations. The mountains remember because they were chosen to remember. But what they remember isn't just one flood. It's the pattern of how worlds in Dand begin again. The flood isn't the first destruction. It won't be the last. Hopi prophecies speak of 4 worlds, each one destroyed when humanity grows corrupt and forgets its sacred obligations. The first world ended in fire, the second in ice, the third in flood. The fourth or a current world awaits its turn. Each destruction preserves a few righteous survivors who carry the wisdom forward into the next cycle. Each reset offers humanity another chance to get it right. Maya cosmology describes 5 suns, 5 ages of creation and destruction. The first humans were made of mud and dissolved in rain. The second were carved from wood, but had no souls, and were destroyed by flood. The third age ended when the sun rained fire. The fourth when jaguar spirits devoured humanity. We live in the 5th sun, knowing it too will end when the earth shakes and the mountains move. Hindu scriptures detail vast cosmic cycles, called kalpas 4.32 billion year periods, where universes are born, flourish, decay, and die. Within each kalpa, smaller cycles called yugas repeat the pattern. Golden ages of wisdom degrading through silver, and bronze ages into iron ages of corruption, culminating in destruction and renewal. The flood of Manu marks just one reset among countless others stretching across deep time. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of multiple creations, each one ending when the people forget the songlines that hold the world together. When humans stop singing the land into existence, the world dissolves back into chaos. Floods, fires, earthquakes, different tools for the same cosmic house cleaning. Zulu cosmology describes recurring cycles where humanity grows proud and forgets to honor the ancestors. The great serpent in Kanyamba rises from the depths, bringing storms and floods that wash away the arrogant civilizations. The humble few who remember the old ways survive to rebuild on higher ground. The pattern transcends individual cultures. Arrogance leads to punishment, leads to survival, leads to renewal. Humanity develops technology, grows proud, stops listening to warnings from the divine or natural world. Catastrophe strikes. The few who maintained humility and preparation survive. They rebuild, passing down both practical knowledge and cautionary tales designed to prevent the next cycle of hubris. But here's where the pattern becomes truly unsettling. The myths suggest these resets aren't random. They're scheduled, built into the fabric of cosmic time itself. Not punishment from angry gods, but maintenance protocols for a universe that periodically needs to defragment its civilizational hard drive. The flood stories aren't describing a unique catastrophe. They're describing the most recent catastrophe, the latest in a series of resets that stretch back through geological deep time, each one preserving just enough survivors and knowledge to restart the cycle. Each one encoding warnings about how the next reset might unfold. The mountains remember not just one flood, but the rhythm of floods, the pattern of how technological civilizations rise, grow overconfident, ignore environmental warnings, and trigger their own destruction. The survivors who reach the high places carry forward both the trauma and the knowledge of how resets work and how to prepare for the next one. The flood myth isn't ancient history. It's a preview of coming attractions. And the cycle is accelerating. The ice is melting again. Greenland's glaciers collapse into the sea at unprecedented rates. Antarctic ice shelves the size of countries break away and drift into warming oceans. Sea levels rise faster than scientists predicted just decades ago. Coastal cities plan for flooding. Island nations prepare for evacuation. The same pattern that created meltwater pulse 1b8 200 years ago is happening again, but this time, it's accelerated by industrial civilization. Meanwhile, the ancient warnings gather dust in museums and theological seminaries. The survival instructions encoded in flood myths get dismissed as primitive superstition, rather than recognized as emergency protocols from people who lived through the last reset. Have we entered the next flood cycle? The one the myths were designed to prepare us for? The evidence suggests a disturbing possibility. Modern civilization might be following the exact same trajectory described in every cyclical destruction myth. Technological advancement leading to hubris. Environmental warnings ignored in favor of short-term profit. The humble voices raising alarms drowned out by those who profit from maintaining the status quo. The flood myths weren't just stories about the past. They were messages meant to injury emergency broadcasts, transmitted across millennia, designed to reach the exact moment when humanity would need them most. When the ice would melt again, when the seas would rise again, when the survival protocols would become relevant again. Ancient ancestors didn't preserve these stories as entertainment. They preserved them as instruction manuals for the next great flood. The vessels, the mountains, the chosen survival elements of a comprehensive disaster response plan encoded in humanity's most durable storage medium. The question isn't whether these floods happened. The question is whether we'll listen to the warnings before the waters rise again. But flood isn't the only reset mechanism preserved in ancient memory. And if water wasn't the only way worlds ended, what about fire?